Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Transparent Realtor, Real Estate, Real Talk, Transparent Guidance. And today we're going to talk about potential out-of-pocket costs for buyers when buying a home. Now, my predominant clientele are VA buyers, right? But we're going to go over just the out-of-pocket costs that could be for any potential buyer. And we're going to start with a down payment. Now, I know for my VA buyers, a down payment doesn't apply to you as a requirement, but if you want to lower your principal amount to lower your monthly payment, you may want to consider a down payment. Typically, we're going to see down payments range from 3.5% of the loan amount to 20% of the loan amount, depending on your loan product and your credit file. But all of those conversations are with the lender. Next, you're going to have closing costs. Now, closing costs are things that are charged by the lender to process your loan. So, unfortunately, most lenders, and I'm going to say most because there are a few, most lenders do not allow you to roll your closing costs into the loan. Now, some of them do. I am not sure of any of those. Most of the lenders that I typically deal with do require those closing costs to be paid at closing. Those closing costs amount range anywhere from 3 to 5% of the loan amount. I will say that also depends on your loan type and your credit file. So if you have any questions about your specific situation, it is always best to contact a trusted lender to get a more specific number for you. Next, we're going to talk about deposits. Now, what do I mean by deposits? Deposits are different than your down payment. Deposits facilitate and go along with the contract. Here in the state of North Carolina, we have two deposits that go along with the offer to purchase. One is called your due diligence deposit, but we're just going to call it a due diligence fee because it is actually not refundable. Okay. And that, like I said, and that is a negotiated amount between you and the seller, you as a buyer and the seller when a buyer submits the offer to purchase to a seller. Your earnest money deposit is a refundable deposit up until the end of the due diligence period, aka your inspection period. So let me run a scenario for you. Say you get under contract on a home as a buyer for $1,000 in due diligence deposit and $1,000 in earnest money deposit. As soon as the seller accepts your offer, buyer, you pay that seller directly that $1,000 due diligence deposit, because remember, it is non-refundable. The only time, and I don't even really like telling people this because it never happens, but the only time, I shouldn't say never, it very rarely happens. The only time the due diligence deposit is refundable back to the buyer is if the seller terminates and breaches contract, which again, if a seller puts their house on the market, that very rarely happens. So understand, buyers, that what you put in that due diligence deposit is gone. Is no longer yours unless you close, and I'll get to that in a second. So once you go under contract, buyers transfer $1,000, whether it be cashier's check or a wire transfers through some electronic means that's agreed upon by both parties. You transfer that due diligence deposit. Then, buyers, you are transferring your earnest money deposit to an attorney to hold on to throughout the duration of the transaction. Both of those deposits credit your closing costs. Okay, let me run some numbers for you so I can make it make sense. We're just going to use easy numbers. Say your closing costs are going to cost you $10,000 at the closing table, but you have $1,000 in due diligence deposit and $1,000 in earnest money deposit with your offer to purchase. Now, because you have $2,000 with those two deposits combined, your closing costs that you're going to have to bring to the closing table are now reduced by those amount, which means you only need to bring $8,000 to the closing table. Okay, so again, those two deposits credit your closing costs should the transaction go through. Now, worst case scenario for buyers is, say, for whatever reason, you have to terminate on the house. If you terminate within that due diligence period, you unfortunately lose that due diligence deposit, but you get your earnest money deposit back. So in this scenario that I presented, you lose the $1,000 in due diligence, but you get your $1,000 earnest money back from the attorney. And that's if you terminate within that due diligence period. And the due diligence period is another negotiated point within a contract. Typically, we see 2 to 3 weeks in most offers in the area. So what happens if you terminate after the due diligence period? Unfortunately, buyers, you are out both of those deposits, and the seller gets to keep those deposits. Your due diligence period is your inspection period, and that's a negotiated time frame. And just for the sake of ease, we'll say 2 weeks. So buyers, if you terminate on your house on day 16 after you're under contract, and it's because your financing fell through, or you found something out about the house, or you can no longer buy, you don't need to buy anymore because you're not moving or life happens, unfortunately, you are out both of those deposits. Buyer, if you terminate at day 10 within your being under contract, then you get your earnest money deposit back. Unfortunately, you are out still that due diligence deposit. Okay. If you guys have any questions about scenarios and what ifs, I'd be more than happy to answer those to you. But if they are very difficult and dynamic, it might be best just to put you in touch with a real estate attorney, because I do know very basic reasons of when you get your earnest money back. But if it's a very specific legal question, I don't want to steer anybody wrong. So next, after those deposits, okay, that is due as soon as your offer is accepted by the seller. Next, your out-of-pocket costs are going to be your home inspection costs. Now, the state of North Carolina is a caveat emptor state, which is a fancy Latin way of saying buyer beware, which is another way of saying sellers don't have to disclose anything wrong with their house. Okay. Now, say I represent a seller, and in the midst of conversation, the seller tells me that they had, structural damage because of a termite infestation that they have repaired, but they don't disclose it. I now, because I'm legally bound to disclose, I have to tell anybody who's interested in the property that has had structural damage. Okay. So what does that mean for you as a buyer? That means get the home inspection. Get the home inspection. Even if it's just a home inspection, get the home inspection. This is my recommendation for you. You don't have to, but that's a huge gamble. Okay. So at basic home inspection, and then if you want any other subsequent inspections on top of that, that's going to cost you money. You're going to bundle your inspection. So home inspection is going to test the components of the house. An enhanced HVAC inspection, why that could be beneficial to you. Home inspectors go to their thermostat and they bump the thermostat up or down a couple degrees depending on the time of year. And if it cools or heats in the amount of time that they're at the property, then they say, yep, it works. They don't open up the components or the side panels. Most of them don't. Don't open up the side panels or look at the HVAC itself. They just say, yes, it cooled or heated in the requisite amount of time. If you want somebody to actually inspect the internal components of an HVAC because it's over a certain amount of years, or maybe it just looks a little wonky and it's not working quite right while you're doing your showing, by all means, I highly recommend getting an enhanced HVAC inspection. It could end up saving you thousands in the long run, and the sellers may not be aware that something in their HVAC is about to fail. So you have your home inspection, a possible enhanced HVAC inspection. You can also do a roof inspection. You can get somebody out there to inspect your roof. You can also get somebody in there. So any home inspector is going to look in the attic and the crawl space if either one of those apply. Okay. So that's not a special inspection that you have to order. But there are, and if depending on the type of sewer system that the house is on, if it's on a septic system, you may want to consider getting the septic system inspected and pumped while you're out there, because most septic systems need to be pumped within every 5 to 7 years to maintain the quality and the life of the septic system. So getting that done will benefit. Next, so if you're on a well water, if you have private well, I recommend getting the well water quality test. Now, I will say for VA buyers, specifically, there are two required inspections that you must have to fulfill your loan requirements. And that is a termite inspection, which costs $60. And I just recommend doing it around $60 because it's worth its weight in gold. And what that's going to do is they're going to inspect your home to determine if there was previous or current termite infestation, if it's been treated, and if there's been any damage for such. And also it's going to determine if there's environments that are conducive for termites. So if there's a really damp crawl space that's conducive for termites, they will call that out also. And then the well water quality test, the VA just wants to make sure your drinking water isn't going to hurt you. So that both of those inspections are on the buyer to complete because it is a contingency of your loan. Okay. Again, so you have your home inspection, a possible HVAC inspection, a possible septic inspection, a possible well water quality inspection, and a possible termite inspection. So those inspection costs are going to range anywhere from $300, we'll say at the most economical with just your basic home inspection, all the way up to approximately $1,500, depending on which company you go with and which inspections you want to choose for the property. Next, you have appraisal costs. Now, not all lenders require a buyer to pay for the appraisal outside of the transaction. Some lenders just put it in with your closing costs and you pay at the closing table. Other lenders require you to pay the appraisal before the appraiser goes out to the property to look at the house. So the difference, just so you know, between an appraisal and an inspection is the inspection is conducted by a home inspector hired by the buyer to determine the condition and the history of the house. The appraisal is ordered by the lender on your behalf as a buyer to determine the value of the property, to make sure that the lender isn't over lending and the value is what it should be, is appropriate for the market. Okay. So like I said, those appraisal costs can run anywhere from $650 to $800 depending on your loan type. And it also depends on your lender whether or not they allow you to pay within your closing costs or they require you to pay prior to the appraiser going out to appraise the house. Okay. So that could be a potential out-of-pocket cost while you're under contract. And then lastly, we're going to talk about buyer's agent compensation. So the rules have changed a few years ago, which now buyers and buyer's agents are required to have a conversation about buyer's agent compensation. So when you speak to that buyer's agent, you ask them what their fee is. That is an agreed upon amount that the buyer will pay the buyer's agent at closing for their service. I will say though, listing agents split their commission to offer a portion of their compensation to a buyer's agent to bring a ready and willing buyer as a marketing tactic and to help sell their seller's house. Okay. So while some buyers may have to pay some or all of their buyer's agent compensation at closing, sometimes listing agents offer a portion of their compensation to pay a buyer's agent. So that's a conversation that you need to have with your buyer's agent and specifically on the property that you're looking at, because those two are two very big variables. And if you want a very specific scenario, you need to walk through that with your buyer's agent so they can understand your needs and capabilities on whether or not buyer's agent compensation is something that you're interested or willing to and can do. Okay, I talked a lot about out-of-pocket costs when it comes to purchasing a house. Some apply to one loan type over another, but I just wanted to give you an overall picture of potential out-of-pocket costs when you are purchasing a house. I'm always available to talk through that with people. I love educating and informing people about the purchasing process, especially if you're a first-time home buyer. So I understand, and that's why I'm doing this, is to inform you of those potential costs. So again, I am Megan Schoaf, the Transparent Realtor. Like I said, if you have any questions or want any more clarification on any of the things I went over, please leave me a comment, subscribe, like, and share my content with anybody that you think would be interested in the content that I'm putting out. I would greatly appreciate that. And again, real estate, real talk, transparent guidance. Have a good day, guys.